Now that we've covered how greenhouse gases work, we can turn to the issue of where the rubber meets the road, global warming. In fact, that's what the current problem used to be called, global warming. Now it's called climate change, though no one is really worried about global cooling. And early on, there were dozens and dozens of forecasts of how much warming might occur. And in response to this cacophony, the World Meteorological Association decided in 1988 that it needed more standardized assessments. Thus, it founded the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC. The IPCC has developed a set of scenarios that are designed to summarize the impact of rising greenhouse gases from many different models. The most useful and most reported ICP scenarios have the memorable name of representative concentration pathways, more commonly abbreviated RCPs. The name designates the extrasolar radiation in watts per square meter that will heat the Earth. So, let's take a look at the IPCC RCPs as measured in 2020, early 2021. So here we go. There are 3 of them shown: RCP 6, RCP 4, an optimistic path, and a path that limits warming to 2 degrees centigrade. Both the optimistic path and certainly the limitation to 2 degrees centigrade by 2021 have pretty much fallen by the wayside. So we're focused primarily on RCP 6 and RCP 4. RCP 6, the red one, is a realistic, modern, modest effort scenario. As of 2021, think of it as a minimal intervention, business as usual scenario. Under RPC 6, global emissions would peak in about 30 years, and temperatures would rise by about 3 degrees centigrade by 2100, relative to pre-industrial times. Let me stop for a second and take a note. Temperature increases are often measured with respect to either pre-industrial times or Renaissance times. And the difference is important because pre-industrial times were particularly cold. So anything that's measured with respect to about the pre-industrial times tends to be about 0.3 to 0.4 degrees centigrade higher than measured with respect to the Renaissance. I'll try to keep that distinction clear as we proceed. So RPC 6 is the semi-business as usual scenario. Few analysts predict much higher emissions paths than that. There is an RCP 8.5, but no one believes that's going to occur. Beginning in late 2021, the IPCC report replaced IPC 6 with the IPCC report replaced RCP 6 with RCP 7, which has become a new prominent scenario. It's very similar to RPC 6 with modestly more warming and modestly more emissions. RCP 4, the blue one, or its near twin RCP 4.5, is an active intervention scenario based on current government pledges. World emissions would peak this decade. Global temperature would rise by 2.5 degrees by 2100. Currently, we are already falling short of RCP 4. Few believe that it is going to be reached. Now look closely at the figure. The expected difference between RCP4 and RCP6 is 0.4 to 0.5 degrees centigrade by 2100. Recent estimates of the global damage associated with the extra 0.4 to 0.5 degrees centigrade warming will be a decline in GDP of about 0.1%, with perhaps half of that coming from agricultural damage. We have never seen, by we I mean Professor Welsh and I, have never seen GDP damage estimates above 0.3% when comparing RCP4 and RCP6. Of course, 0.1% of global GDP is a lot of money, a few $100 billion. But these are damages that are eminently survivable for human civilization. If you suffer from existential climate change anxiety, you need perspective. Now, the IPCC takes the emissions from the previous graph. Notice in this graph on the y-axis we have gigatons of emissions of CO2. That's what's being projected in the RCPs. Takes those projections and translates them into projected future temperatures. The temperature increase is what's on the y-axis in this chart. And 8.5 is an absolutely do-nothing scenario, which has already been made obsolete because nations are doing something. And RCP 2.5, where global emissions have already peaked, is particularly unlikely. So once again, we're comparing 4.5 and 6.0. As of now, we're actually falling slightly short of the objective of 4.5, but we're doing better than 6.0. So somewhere in that range. And what it shows is the increase in temperature from pre-industrial times. And notice the chart starts in 2021, and we're already 1.3 degrees above pre-industrial, or 1 degree above Renaissance, from previous emissions and warming. And then this takes it up from there. In RCP 4.5, by 2100, the mean projection is 2.8 degrees centigrade warming and 600 parts per million carbon dioxide concentration. In RPC 6.0, it's 3.6 degrees warming and 700 parts per million carbon dioxide concentration. So presumably we're going to be somewhere between these two. This is what we have to prepare for. This is what we have to adapt to. And we have to ask the question, what is the best way to limit it to RCP 4.5, if not actually exceed that? Are international negotiations the way to go? If not, what are the alternatives? We'll address those issues in further lectures. But from now, the takeaway is, if the distinction is between RCP 4.5 and RCP 6.0, we're talking about relatively small damages, maybe 1 to 0.3% of GDP. And we have to keep that in perspective. Thanks for joining us.